Welcome to Ancient World Studies. My name is Dr. Raoul McLaughlin. The question is, why did the Romans explore Inner Africa? The expedition of AD 42. In AD 41, the Emperor Caligula summoned King Ptolemy, the son of Juba II, to Rome. Caligula had Ptolemy killed and announced his intention to annex Mauritania and bring northwest Africa under his direct imperial control. But this provoked an uprising among the Moors, who dominated the desert territories inland from the urbanized coast. Led by Adamon, a loyal freedman of the murdered King Ptolemy, the region revolted from Roman rule. Caligula appointed a commander named Suetonius Paulinus to defeat the rebels, restore order, and annex this new frontier province. Suetonius Paulinus is better known to historians as the governor who defeated a revolt by Queen Boadicea in Roman Britain 20 years later. For the campaign in Mauritania, Suetonius Paulinus was supported by a commander named Geta, who led forces based in the neighbouring province of Africa Proconsularis. Geta led his army across the salt-encrusted Chott to engage the enemy in their remote mountain strongholds. But this was a high-risk strategy, and it was only the sudden and unexpected arrival of rain that saved his army from succumbing to thirst and exhaustion. Further east, Paulinus seems to have followed a similar strategy and led his forces into the high Atlas Mountains to defeat the rebels and destroy the communities they depended on for support. Pliny explains. The first occasion on which the armed forces of Rome fought in Mauritania was in the reign of Claudius, when King Ptolemy had been put to death by Caligula and his freedman Adamon was seeking to avenge him. It is an accepted fact that our troops went as far as Mount Atlas in pursuit of the routed natives. But during these operations, Paulinus did something extraordinary. He led a Roman campaign force out of Mauritania and across the high Atlas Mountains to survey the unknown regions of Inner Africa. Why did Suetonius conduct this campaign? Modern scholars provide the usual explanations. Paulinus must have been looking for new trade routes or anticipating some outer frontier threat from distant desert peoples. However, the explanation could have been because Paulinus had certain attitudes and ambitions. In his account of Roman Britain, the historian Tacitus often attributes imperial success and expansion to the characteristics of individual governors. Perhaps Paulinus enjoyed the challenge of leading high-risk ventures into uncharted regions to expand Roman interests and knowledge. Possibly, he also sought the attendant fame and glory from these enterprises. 20 years later, when Paulinus was governor of southern Britain, he led a large Roman expedition west to attack unconquered territory in northern Wales. This was at the western limit of Britain, and Paulinus fought to capture the island of Anglesey on the coast facing the Irish Sea. He was the first Roman to reach this outer region, near the western edge of the known world. Perhaps he was attracted by the reputation that frontier exploration and conquest would bring. Tacitus also suggests that Paulinus undertook his campaign to Anglesey because a rival Roman general named Corbola had achieved successes in Armenia. Paulinus therefore wanted to at least match or outdo the achievements of his contemporary. Tacitus explains that Suetonius Paulinus was a formidable competitor to Corbulo in military skill and popular report. He was anxious to equal the honours that Corbulo received by recovering Armenia by crushing a national enemy. Maybe a competitive attitude was part of his personality, and Paulinus crossed the Atlas Mountains to outdo the achievements of his associate General Geta. Certainly, in terms of trade, the inland region of Mauritania seems to have had few unique or high-value resources that would attract imperial attention. Pliny mentions the existence of plants on the hillsides that were useful as laxatives, but other remedies existed in more accessible parts of the world. Strabo mentions copper mines in Mauritania and pitch deposits that might be used for waterproofing the hulls of ships, but these were common resources. Some gemstones also reached the region from the central Sahara, including red carnelian and yellowy-green amazonite. However, it was the unfamiliar insects and strange reptiles that attracted most Roman curiosity and attention. Strabo reports, "Somewhere in this area are copper deposits and a spring of asphalt." Writers report a multitude of scorpions, both winged and wingless, which have 7 vertebrae. Likewise tarantulas, which are exceptional both in size and in number, and lizards, which are said to be up to 8 foot long. On the desert side of the mountains are said to be found the lignite and Carthaginian gemstones. The giant lizards may be the species known to modern science as the West African Nile monitor lizard. The Romans were therefore entering a territory filled more with horrors and potential dangers than commercial incentives. What did the Romans expect in the Atlas Mountains? Even in this era, the high Atlas Mountains were a land of semi-legend. Pliny recounts stories of goat-footed Pans in the mountain groves, and somewhere at the centre of this wilderness might be the vast petrified form of the Titan Atlas. The outer mountains were tall enough to receive rainfall, which sustained forests in the foothills of the range. Consequently, Roman forces leaving the desert fringe trekked through forests of tall, unfamiliar trees with strange foliage. Pliny records that these forests near the mountains swarm with every kind of elephant and snake and are inhabited by a tribe called the Canari. The Canari are described as hunters who pursued wild animals in the forests. After a 10-day ascent, Suetonius reached the summit of the mountains and saw peaks covered with deep snowdrifts, even in the height of summer. Beyond the mountains was an expanse of black sand desert. Roman forces travelled down to the plains to investigate this barren landscape. Pliny reports that they crossed deserts covered with black dust, occasionally broken by projections of rock that looked as if they had been burnt. This is a region rendered uninhabitable by heat, although it was winter when Paulinus explored it. The explorers came to a river called the Gur before returning across the mountains. This is perhaps the Guir, which flows from the high Atlas to disappear some distance into the inner desert. Pliny confirms that. Suetonius Paulinus, who was consul in our own times, was the first Roman commander who actually crossed the Atlas range and advanced many miles beyond it. But there was another possible motive for this military action. In the Roman psyche, the full exploration of a territory, especially its outer limits, may have been necessary to demonstrate that a conquest had been completed. Tacitus describes how in AD 83, the Roman governor Julius Agricola ordered a Roman fleet to sail round the entire north coast of Scotland as the culmination of his British campaigns. By crossing the high Atlas Mountains, Paulinus had demonstrated that Roman forces could penetrate the furthest extent of the province, beyond which there seemed to be no significant inhabited territories. Based on available accounts, Pliny combined Roman reports of Inner Africa to create a speculative geography of the region. Rivers flowed from the mountains of Mauritania east into desert, where they disappeared into the sand. Pliny reasoned these must be the sources of the Nile, which flowed underground beneath Garamantic territory to fill their fogaras with abundant fresh clean water. The Romans deduced, It has been observed that the Nile rises in proportion to excessive falls of snow or rain in Mauritania. Issuing from Mauritania, the river scorns to travel through arid deserts of sand, and after a distance of several days' journey, it retreats underground. Afterwards, it bursts out in another larger lake in the territory of the Mesales clan of Mauritania Cicerensis. Thereafter, it surveys the communities of mankind on its journey across the land, providing proof of its identity by carrying the same animals. Sinking again into the sand of the desert, it hides for another 20 days' journey until it reaches the nearest Ethiopians. Then, when it becomes aware of man's proximity, it leaps out in a fountain, probably the one called the Black Spring. This strange narrative connected many of the known rivers and water sources of Africa into a single narrative involving the Nile. This seemed plausible to Romans with no understanding of prehistoric aquifers. They did not realize that the actual River Nile extended more than 4,000 miles in a north-south direction. Pliny hints that other Roman governors may have entered the Atlas Mountains, but they did not explore the bleak desert territories beyond. He writes, "The generals who were drawn from the Senate commanded in that campaign and were able to boast of having penetrated the Atlas range. This distinction was also shared by the Equites, who subsequently governed the country." But these were limited ventures, and no new information was subsequently added to the extraordinary account by Paulinus. Why didn't Paulinus or other Roman generals repeat these exploratory missions? Perhaps the actions of Paulinus were overshadowed by the campaign conducted in eastern Mauritania by Geta. Tacitus barely mentions Paulinus in his account of this conflict, but he does record how Geta almost lost his army due to thirst and fatigue when entering the desert, and was only saved when a mystic invoked the gods to provide rain. Based on these accounts, the emperor may have disallowed further high-risk military ventures into marginal unknown territories. In many cases, the risks involved in new conquests were probably greater than the expected rewards. The first emperor Augustus compared Roman conquests to fishing with a golden hook, as the advantage of success would often be less than the military and political risk of failure. Many Roman provinces contributed only about 5 million sesterces to central imperial revenues. In contrast, the wage cost of a Roman legion, including 5,000 citizen soldiers and an equal number of supporting auxiliary troops, was more than 10 million sesterces per annum. This is double the surplus revenue of an entire province, not including the potential loss of valuable lives and equipment. In any situation, the loss of a legion would be a major blow to Roman prestige and could encourage revolt in newly subdued regions. For example, the Emperor Augustus had endured the trauma of the loss of 3 legions in Germany. The actions by Paulinus could also have been considered reckless, since Mauritania had not been fully pacified when he launched his expeditions. 20 years later, he would take a similar risk when he was governor of Roman Britain. While the main army campaigned in Anglesey, Queen Boadicea of the Iceni tribe revolted. Most of the infantry in the 9th Legion were massacred in the uprising, and the Roman cities of Colchester and Londinium were sacked and burned. Roman armies served as occupation forces, and it was often unwise to remove them from their strategic position.